First guest this afternoon, Liberal MP Craig Kelly and Green Senator Jordan Still-John here in the studio with me. Thanks both for joining me, gentlemen.
Great to be with you.
Good to be with you on a Friday when most of our colleagues have escaped Parliament House. There's a few are still here working.
They have.
Yeah, most of the country is still working, which is an interesting...
Well, but I'm sure you'd argue that you're all still out there working, talking to constituents.
Yeah, absolutely.
Let's start on medevac. So Beirut Bachani, we're told, won't get to Australia. And then this is someone who arrived by boat after that 2013 date.
Yes.
An asylum seeker, a refugee, and now is looking to be granted asylum in New Zealand. And the minister's saying, well, we can block him coming for Australia, but you're still saying you need this lifetime visa ban rule to block anyone else coming to Australia. What's the difference?
Well, remember, this is all designed to ensure that the boats stay stopped. Remember, we like to use the expression, stop the boats, but the reality is the boats are just on hold. And that's always been our concern. If you weaken the laws, if you weaken the regulation, if you open back doors, you'll end up starting the boats again. And that's what all the legislation and all the policies, which I know sometimes seems very hard and sometimes we get criticised for, that's the ultimate goal.
But it does show as well, as we know, the Immigration Minister is all powerful. So if you want to have a policy of not letting people use New Zealand as the back door that it's described as, it can be done without legislation. That seems to prove this.
Look, possibly. You're talking about also over a long period of time, a long number of years. We simply don't want to open up the message to the people smugglers. We've successfully repealed the medevac legislation. I'm sure a lot of the people smuggling industry was very disappointed in that. They would have been hoping that that would have given them a real product to go back into the market to sell. Now we're making sure that door's closed, we're making sure the New Zealand one's closed as well.
For people hoping they might get resettled in New Zealand, well, one day soon maybe, given that the New Zealand Prime Minister's sort of cleared the way on this, surely if they were told, look, you can be resettled, you won't be able to come to Australia, but you'll have all other rights, they'd sign on the dotted line straight away, wouldn't they?
Well, I think what we've just heard from Craig and what has dominated this last week of Parliament is a kind of an intense version of the debates that we've been having in this country now for 20 or more years. And what's particularly been brought home to me this week is that juxtaposition between part of our community preparing for the wonderful, community time of Christmas, while the Parliament debates a bill which the sole aim of the medevac bill is to make sure that desperately ill people can get the treatment they deserve. That you don't die of the flu or die of an infected toe, as 12 people have done in our care over the last couple of years. And to see the fundamental humanity of so many people boiled down to these lines about stopping the boats and the people smugglers business model and all of this stuff really does show, I think, how disconnected the major parties have become on this issue to the actual humanity of the people that we're talking about. Beirut Bachani is one of the most intelligent, articulate, thoughtful human beings that I have ever interacted with. And the idea that we would be actively keeping somebody of Beirut's moral clarity and integrity from ever visiting Australia is a really...
But it's not about his moral clarity nor integrity. It's about warnings from people that work within departments as well, that if they're seen as a path to Australia, that people will want to come here. No one's begrudging people wanting to come here, desperate for a new life in some cases.
But that's just not... again, this is where we've got to. Those warnings and this whole idea about sugar on the table and all of the nonsense lines that we've kind of normalised over the last 10, 20, 15 years, there is actually no basis in
except reality. For the years that Labor were in power and 50,000 people arrived here by boat.
But that's, again, this is one of these silly conversations we have about you put the sugar on the table and then people come. That's not actually what...
Why did 50,000 come in that period and now there are almost no boats coming?
But we don't know that there are no boats.
Well, we know there are very few.
They're an on-water matter. We don't... Well, neither
but you're not seriously saying that in the last 6 years 50,000 have also come.
What I am saying to you, Tom, is that if ultimately the objective here is to protect the lives of human beings, then our policy at the moment is failing profoundly to do that.
But you're also questioning the efficacy of whether boats stopped as a result. That seems pretty clear-cut.
Well, it is not clear-cut because there's no transparency. Like you cannot say to me that no boats have attempted to come, that the flows have
I'm not
stopped.
saying none, but over the past few years, the information we get, I agree, it's limited, and journalists always want more, but it's been a handful. I mean, clearly there's been a massive reduction in people attempting to come to Australia. All the available evidence we have, reporting from overseas, what's happening in Indonesia, even interviews with people smugglers and so on, that's what we have. The efficacy, you can certainly disagree with the policy and say it's harsh and talk about increasing humanitarian intake, but the efficacy of stopping boats.
Well, until we've got that clear line of sight on what actually isn't or is not happening on water, then we actually can't say that definitively one way or another. But what we can absolutely say definitively is that if your goal is to protect the human lives of people, our policy simply has taken a cohort of those people, locked them up in indefinite detention, created a virtual head on a spike.
They're not locked up anymore, the people in...
Well, again, that is a point upon which we would disagree, but we've put a head on a spike, said, whatever you are experiencing in your country of origin, this is worse, do not come this way. That doesn't protect people, it condemns them to mental and physical torture.
Just so I could on this very quickly, it's very important why we have these policies. Now, Jonathan wasn't in Parliament previously.
Jordan.
I was. Jordan. We had 1,200 people, at least we know, that died at sea. We saw the bodies of men, women and children washed up upon the rocks at Christmas Island. So whenever we talk about humanity, that is what we don't want to see happening.
Craig, do you honestly believe that the benchmark of good policy in Australia should be whether it's better than dying in the ocean?
Absolutely. We've had zero since we bought these. Since we bought these policies. Since we have bought these.
As long as it's better than dying in the ocean, then it's a good policy.
You might want to close your eyes to over 1,200 people that have died. Is that
the benchmark of a successful government policy?
Obviously, if we've had no deaths since we brought this policy in, since the coalition was elected,
higher, then is it better than dying in the ocean?
Since the coalition has been elected, there have been zero deaths at sea. Now, it's very easy to sort of close your eyes and think, oh, we'll be humanity. It's the idea that...
This is the fundamental problem, Craig. As long as it's better than dying at sea, you say it's a success. My argument would be that in the 21st century, Australian policy should have a better level, a yardstick of success than what it is like to drown in the ocean.
So about whether there might be any regrets about some of the cases of deaths and infection and illness that have occurred, about some of the incidents as well in what were previously the detention centres.
There's no doubt this has been a very difficult policy area to try and fix up the mess that we inherited. When we were in opposition, we warned what would happen if you loosened up our border policies, and that cost the lives of over 1,000 people. Now, we've since fixed it up. We want to ensure those boats stay stopped. And people living on Nauru, what about the people that actually live on Nauru, the locals there? Is life on Nauru so much worse than it is back in these refugee camps overseas? Absolutely not. And we've been able to also increase our migration intake. We've increased our humanitarian intake.
But the thing about Nauru, and not to cast aspersions on the local there, is there's nothing really there. There's no economy. It's pretty hard to build a life. It's a tiny island you can drive around in half an hour. I mean, I've been there. There's not much there.
What are the people? What do you say to the people that live on Nauru, the native Nauruans themselves? Well, how do you say that to those people?
Well, they're not our responsibility.
Look, obviously, everyone. You know, if I lived anywhere in Southeast Asia or Asia or the Middle East, I would be doing everything I could to get my family to Australia because of what the life we have. But the reality is we can't accept everyone. We have to set some limits, and we have to have a policy where those that come are decided by the Australian government, not by the people smugglers.
The official intake for Australia is actually pretty generous, and in their headlines this week, New Zealand making this offer, everyone says, well, good on New Zealand. They take 1,000 a year.
Well, let's be
even compared to population, we're far more generous.
Well, let's be, again, I don't think we should set our policies to whatever might be a global, you know, lowest common denominator. The reality
But when you say fair shared, doesn't Australia do quite well when you do compare it?
No, it doesn't do well at all, particularly not in the context where we have more people on the move in the world than at any time since post the Second World War. Our region, the Asia-Pacific region, hosts hundreds of thousands of refugees. The vast majority of refugee populations globally are hosted in the global south. These are issues which are...
And And our nearest
overwhelmingly
neighbour
dealt with.
does far less than us, even on a per capita basis.
Well, that's an issue for New Zealand, not for us. We're one of the richest countries in the world. We have profound challenges. I have to say, profound challenges when it comes to an ageing population, population densities in rural and regional communities. We have closed ourselves to the great benefits of migration.
We're taking record numbers.
Purely for political reasons.
I want to try to get to one or two more topics. The economy, retail spending is completely in the doldrums, Craig Kelly. Nobody seems reassured by the government's message, by the Treasurer's message in particular. The economy's fine, go out to spend. Nobody's listening, are they?
Look, it's a difficult time for the economy. We've in one of the biggest droughts our nation has seen. You've got income in all those regional areas substantially down. You've got global trends. You look at the growth around the world. Our growth is still well ahead of the major G7 nations.
Unless you factor in population, and then it's a different story.
Well, look, the only country that's ahead of us in GDP growth at the moment is the USA, under that terrible President Trump and the terrible job that he's doing over there. They're the only ones ahead of us. That's the numbers. So, look, the economy is chugging along. Yes, it could be doing better, but when you throw everything into the mix, when you throw in the factor of the drought, when you flow in those factor of the global conditions in the economy, things are actually going...
But why aren't people reassured by Josh Frydenberg's message?
Well, let's see what the final figures are after this Christmas season. People are holding back. Everyone's got, everyone's got big expenditures over Christmas, and let's see what the numbers come out in January.
I'm interested in your take on this because there are plenty of people out there, an increasing number, that talk about minimalism and let's not just buy stuff to throw it under a tree and so on. Are you almost encouraged by consumers paying off debt, saving money?
Well, I think what's really clear, and I had an opportunity to speak in the last day of Parliament on the issue of increasing Newstart, right, which is something which bites. I'm talking poverty here. Poverty bites hard at Christmas time. Now, we've seen a concerted effort over the last 2 years to bring together people to raise the rate of Newstart so that we can help people out of poverty. One of the wonderful byproducts of that, it isn't the reason we should do it, but the byproduct of that is that there is a form of economic stimulus because people take that money and they invest it in their local...
because these people aren't saving money. I understand that, and we've covered it before, we'll cover it again, but I'm interested in what you think about that concept of maybe people not wanting to just buy things for the sake of buying things. I mean, does that speak to you at all?
I really couldn't say one way or another, Tom, to be honest. I think the important thing, when I look at these economic figures, what it says to me is that the economic orthodoxy of this country for the last 25 years is running out of steam. We're seeing economic indicators which we shouldn't see. Nobody can get their head around why we are seeing the types of low interest rates but also consistently low growth that we have seen in the economy. And I think it's two problems. We've got stagnated wages, which have not risen in line with inflation. And we are also seeing a government failing to take advantage of some of the cheapest money in history. This is a time when you would, under any other administration, any other conservative administration around the world, would take advantage of these historically low interest rates and the historically cheap nature of the money which Australia can borrow to invest in productive infrastructure. And we just haven't seen that over the
there is the infrastructure rollout that was increased lately, but the government also wants to pay off debt,
building stuff
obviously.
that doesn't really work for us. This is the infrastructure of the 20th century, not the infrastructure of the 21st.
I wanted to ask finally and briefly, I was hearing something in my ear. If someone has a message for me from the studio, if I should be going to something, let me know. You can see how the sausage is made at home here. The fake news inquiry, Craig Kelly. So both major parties are ticking this off. It's interesting that the thing that it's being targeted here is the inheritance tax. This claim on Facebook, for example, that Labor had an inheritance tax planned, it wasn't true. So next time, this might be taken down off Facebook more hastily. Would that be a good thing? True?
Maybe we could do the one about the Mediscare as well. We could go back to that.
But same basket?
Look, the reality, no, it's not the same basket.
Why not?
The reality is, at the last election, Labor's policy...
Hang on, why isn't it the same basket?
I'll quickly go through exactly the reason why. At the last election, Labor had their policy on the franking credits, which had self-funded retirees would have had to dip into their nest egg and wouldn't have left the same amount of assets that they were.
That's not what the story was.
It was a de facto inheritance
not the
tax.
story.
No, it was.
No,
No,
that's
it was.
not.
No, that's true. It was. Anyone that was anyone that was a self-funded retiree that wanted to put a nest egg aside,
It wouldn't even matter self-funded. Anyone that's a retiree, anything
that was relying on, that was using the legal requirement of the franking credits to live off and to provide themselves with an income, that had saved up and set a nest egg that they wanted to give to their kids and grandkids. That would have been drawn down. They would have had to drawn down on that. So the inheritance that they would have been able to bequest to future generations would not have been there under Labor's policy.
So then, under that sort of guise, if Labor has a more generous policy on low-income earners and they have children, it's a children tax that the government's proposing compared to Labor. I mean, there wasn't an inheritance tax.
Well, if you had a money set aside as an inheritance that you wanted to bequest to your children and grandchildren, under Labor's policy, you would have had to draw down on that. So it was a de facto inheritance tax.